We have a new reality that requires new rules, but we've been educated in an old reality and we keep holding on to the tools and rules that no longer apply. If we build identity on external factors in a highly volatile and disrupted environment, we are creating a condition in which we will always feel broken because something in external condition will inevitably get destroyed and faster than ever before, 200% plus faster than before. After COVID, they were measuring levels of disruption. In the 5 years, 2011 to 16, the levels of disruption grew 4%. The following 5 years, the growth was not 8% or 20% or 50%, it was 200%. And it staying in that levels. You can imagine your family life changing, your health changing, your job situation changing, but it's very hard to imagine that you can wake up one day and you don't have a country anymore. And that's exactly what happened to us. So there was no warning sign, there was no referendum. Literally 3 people got drunk in the woods and signed a document of resolution, and nobody was prepared. And in that sense, it created an opening in me, feeling that everything my family prepared me. So I felt like this was my playground.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and today I am joined by the wonderful Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva. Dr. Nadia is someone that I came across a number of years ago. I kept hearing her name being mentioned by a lot of people, and then I got to see her in action a couple of years ago at a Thrive conference for the National Speakers Association, and she blew everyone out of the water. She was incredible at what she was talking about. And what she talks about and focuses on is reinvention. So Dr. Nadia is often called the reinvention guru, or the queen of reinvention. And she's a scientist, she's an entrepreneur, she's an author, she specializes in resilience and reinvention. And as a consultant and educator, she's helped organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Coca-Cola, Cisco, L'Oreal, lots of other great organizations as well, to reinvent their products, their leadership practices, as well as their business model. So she really is an expert when it comes to this notion of reinvention. And we'll get into what reinvention means. But I was delighted to get the opportunity and reached out to her and her team to have a conversation with her about the power of reinvention in the modern society. We are living in a very turbulent world, massive amounts of change. AI is turning everything upside down. Just when we thought that we'd reached our level or capacity for change, it's turned everything. So the ability that we have to be able to reinvent what we do and how we do it is critical. Dr. Nadia, as a speaker, has delivered keynotes and workshops to over 500,000 executives and 4 TEDx talks. And as an author, she's written several award-winning books. One of them is the Chief Reinvention Officer, and she's also contributed to Forbes and the Harvard Business Review, amongst others. So we could be here forever. The whole podcast episode, Dr. Nadia, could be me just talking about how amazing you are. But thank you so much for coming on the Change Your Minds podcast.
Oh, and thank you so much for having me. And let's do something for the listeners and get into the meat of the story. So appreciate so much the invite.
Fantastic. So Dr. Nadia, the first thing I wanted to check in with you on is there's a number of lessons, and you shared some of these when I heard you speak, but there's a number of lessons that you got from your background growing up in Kazakhstan as part of the Soviet Union. A few years ago, I went to North Korea, and just the experience of being there for a few days really helped me to see things in a radically different way when I came back, as well as when I was there. From your experience living through that, could you share some of the most important insights you gained from spending time earlier in your life in Kazakhstan?
I think you being the professional in the field of mindsets, paradigms, and the frames of reference, and how much your inner frame of reference shapes your reality, you can imagine that the most important impact the collapse of Soviet Union had on me is completely changing the idea that we live in a stable world. You can imagine your family life changing, your health changing, your job situation changing, but it's very hard to imagine that you can wake up one day and you don't have a country anymore. And that's exactly what happened to us. So there was no warning sign, there was no referendum. Literally 3 people got drunk in the woods and signed a document of resolution, and nobody was prepared. And in that sense, it created an opening in me, feeling that everything my family prepared me, and I come from a family of enemies of the states who were constantly living in volatility and threats of every kind. So I felt like this was my playground. This was a natural environment. But of course, absolute majority of population didn't see any relief in the collapse of the Soviet Union at all, regardless of millions of lives in concentration camps and regardless of everything that Soviet Union forced upon its citizens. Most people would rather live in a horrible but predictable present than to face uncertain future. And that was a very big wake-up call for me, that even if you see that your reality is horrific, you still cling to it. And it became a question mark for me. How do those few who do successfully jump to a new reality, how do they do it? What separates one person who faces a disruption and collapses from another one who faces a disruption and leaps into a better version of themselves? Or what separates one company that faces a AI disruption and uses it as an opportunity and another company that completely falls apart? That's been the drive for my scientific inquiry since then.
And so when you look at the science of what it means to be combating or handling or dealing with change, you take, for example, your experience.
Yeah.
You were thrown into a hugely volatile, usually uncertain, usually difficult situation, and you had to learn to thrive, right? It was your only opportunity. So from that perspective, given the fact that many of the folks that you work with don't have, I'm going to say the luxury, but I don't mean that at all, because it's obviously, really tough times. But sometimes we're forged through the toughest times that we get through. What about the folks that you work with that you're trying to help them to be more comfortable with change, but they've really had a relatively stable experience or existence up to now this point? What are the biggest impediments that you see in trying to help them to be able to handle the changes that they're forced to make for the first time, maybe?
So it's always a set of beliefs, and I go against a lot of my fellow scientists, my own community, who keep showing up on public media and say that humans hate change. If that was the case, and here I'm speaking not only as a researcher, but also as a mother of a 21-year-old, if that was the case, our kids would never learn to speak, walk, talk, do anything. If we hated change at birth, we would never evolve. We would never grow. We would never learn the skills we learn. We are born excellent at change. We are born excellent at uncertainty. A healthy baby doesn't need a bonus to start walking. Neither does it need a detailed agenda for a day to deal with uncertainty of what will happen in the next 30 minutes. Most of our presets, our factory presets at birth, make us excellent reinventors. And that's why a healthy baby will keep falling until he or she starts walking. No baby falls 10 times, sits down and says, in this lifetime, this walking is just not for me. That doesn't happen. They walk, they fall and fall until they walk. We are born excellent at change. We're just educated out of it. Long before we are even verbal, early at the very pre-verbal stage, we get a lot of cues from our environment and then later larger society that equates change for dangers, for something, a danger, a loss. We even do experiments. So when I run executive retreats, I actually do experimental exercise where I show them that they themselves, by their actions, mostly perceive change as a loss, almost never a gain. Just the way they act out change is always reducing things and removing things, not adding things and expanding things. So we are associating change with a loss, with danger, with discomfort very early in our childhood. And from there on, of course, it's only strengthened and kind of solidified through all the stages of education. Most of our education systems were developed in the era of very low volatility. That meant we needed to teach our kids to sit down and shut up. And that's what we do on day one of a school. everywhere I've been on planet Earth, with few experimental schools as an exception. We need them to sit down and shut up because they will never need innovation and change skills. They will never need to evolve. They will need to hold a job for 30, 40 years. That was the standard. The issue is that we have a new reality that requires new rules, but we've been educated in an old reality, and we keep holding on to the tools and rules that no longer apply.
I think that's a great answer to me whenever I think about change, and this is something that I kind of will use whenever I talk about changes. We talk about the term growth and we talk about the term change. And growth has a positive connotation. So if you turn around and you say to someone, you've really changed, oftentimes we mean that in a bad way. Whereas when you say you've really grown, there's almost no situations where that's something bad. And so to your point, I think what's critical is that we start to transform the beliefs we have around change. But you don't always talk about change per se. I mean, change is a huge part of all you do, but you use the term reinvention instead. Could you talk a little bit about what made you choose that idea or that term of reinvention to really go in on, like Chief Reinvention Officer, like the focus that you have on that term, as opposed to talking about how we adapt and how we change and all that sort of stuff?
So this word showed up in my life through a wonderful friend of mine who is also your friend, Mark Levy. And it was literally in a very, very heated Skype conversation where he was kind of forcing me or pushing me in a corner to define what I do. At that time, I was a fractional executive in a mining and metals company, almost 100,000 employees. And he asked me, if your job had a formal title, what would it be? And I kept going through a list, and I would say, well, it's a chief strategy officer, but I also do a lot of implementation. I also introduce a lot of systemic innovation and also innovation pipeline and innovation forum. And this organization was my product. So I cannot separate it from innovation. I cannot say chief innovation officer because I do a lot of work with legacy assets. There's a lot of assets that will have to be in operations for 20, 30, 40 years. So it's not exactly innovation. It's not just change because there's a lot of numbers involved, a lot of R&D involved. It's not just project management. So the nature of work was about integrating three fields that have been essentially at war with each other for a long time. And all three have to do with renewal, organizational renewal. One is anticipating change, which is usually in companies done by strategy, by economists, sometimes by marketing, foresight, trend watching. Second is designing change, which is usually innovation, R&D, design thinking. And third is implementing change, which is usually project management, change management, HR, organizational development, and a few others. But they were not in a cohesive system. And I needed a word that once becomes an umbrella that holds those camps together and aligns them. Second, I needed a very clear message that we need a portfolio approach where, yes, something is innovative, but also continuous improvement, also incremental change. So you need a diversified portfolio of efforts where you would have some things that are quite radical innovation, but some are just incremental improvement. And I needed a term that was not exactly, let's say, abused and had a lot of attachment with it already. And all other terms were already quite abused and quite strongly emotionally charged among the corporate world. So those were original reasons. But essentially, reinvention is aligning strategy, innovation, and change into one seamlessly working system where each area passes the baton and each area leads at certain times in the process.
Fantastic. And so when you do work with folks in, I mean, you know, you've got an incredible portfolio of organizations you've helped, not to mention, you know, so many of the people that you've trained to be able to go in and help in organizations to, you know, reinvent everything from products to marketing approaches they have, et cetera, et cetera. When you work with people and your goal is to be able to help them to be more comfortable with change. So to your point, at a very early age, we're great with change, but then all of a sudden we learn not to be. And for lots of reasons, socialization, culture, you name it, we're looking to be able to keep things as stable as possible, keep doing things the same way. And it's almost like it's taken out of us. from your perspective, how do you work with different folks that you're trying to help to reinvent when they might have such a fear of change, when they're dealing with a massive amount of uncertainty? And, reinvention doesn't cure certainty. It just allows you to be able to adapt more effectively, which in turn lets you to be way better in an uncertain world, but it doesn't stop you from feeling uncertain. So how do you help people from a mindset perspective in the work that you do to be able to deal with the massive amount of change that is involved in being alive in 2025 in the business world?
So we develop tons of tools to help in a very short period of time switch fundamental beliefs about the world. And number one fundamental belief that we're working with has to do with research in the speed of change. So majority of people we meet when we just start working in organizations assume that speed of change is much slower than it is, assume the levels of disruption that are quite low compared to actual data, and assume that they have time. And we do two things. We use science to give them data to confront their assumptions. And then immediately after the intellectual input, we use biohacking, if you wish, the science of neurological systems to help them deal with emotions. So we don't skip the biological, hormonal setup that we have. We actually work with it. And that's what I see a lot of practitioners in both inside the organizations and consultants make a mistake. They come with a presentation on facts. Here's where the market is, and here's the competitors, and here's the data on AI, and here's the data on COVID, or whatever else. This is our challenge. Let's brainstorm the solution. Biologically, at that moment, it's impossible to brainstorm a solution because you just turn on the fight or flight syndrome in the human being. Meaning, number one, the blood is now being redirected from the brain into the muscles because the body is preparing for physical attack. That's the only bodily response to any kind of threat. You showed me many slides on the screen about the threat. My body will start preparing for either killing the threat or running away from the threat. And for that, all the blood needs to leave the brain and go into the muscles. That's why your heart rate goes up and your blood pressure increases during stress, because your body is literally pumping blood into your extremities where you usually don't have that much blood supply, into your feet to run away, into your hands to hit the enemy. But where that blood is not is in your brain. We actually show the blood vessels shrinking by about 75% in your brain during your typical stress response. Second thing that happens is auditory exclusion. I'm sure you've been into high stressful meetings and you don't remember what was said. That just means you're healthy and normal. Because in a normal health response, you do not register noises that are not related to survival. And on and on and on. So a huge problem is skipping the step where we regulate our biology back into what is called parasympathetic nervous system, the calm part of our nervous system, where we are able to creatively think for solutions, where we are able to hear each other, where we are able to see the big picture, where we are able to question assumptions. And so what we do is both use data to wake people up, but also exercises around neuroscience, or built on neuroscience, that regulate the nervous system before any other activities taking place. That was a super long answer. Very nerdy and super long.
Listen, I'm, as anyone will tell you about this podcast, we are super nerdy here. We love those answers. So thank you for that. It's interesting, as you were talking, one of the things so my main focus is all about influence and belief change. And everything that I've studied over the course, the main framework that I use to describe one of the three conditions that you need for a belief to change is a lot of people go straight to what needs to make sense, or from your perspective, you need to logically give them the evidence. But to your point, that's not enough. And so the way I describe it is a new belief needs to feel right. It needs to fit in. And by fit in, I mean fit in with their identity, fit in with their community, fit in with the overall other beliefs that work for them. And then it needs to make sense, which is the logic of the story you tell around it. But if you don't get the feeling right, then it doesn't matter how logical your positioning is or how your presentation is. It doesn't matter if you master Aristotle's syllogisms. Still, it's not going to work, because you gave the example of the fight or flight response. Well, it's any kind of negative feeling that people might have towards a belief, they're going to use that to shut it off and to say, look, no, this is not true. So any of the exercise you might do, and again, I'm not sure what those might be, but I'm guessing you could do anything from different guided meditations or non-sleep deep rest or visualizations that allow you to help the person to regulate their own system such that they're able to tap into and access the kind of frames of mind where they can make smarter, better, more conscious, deliberate decisions. Would that be the kind of approach we're talking about when we talk? I mean, I know already of the scientific evidence that you give, and I was witness to that in terms of your keynote, which was so powerful. And that creates its own emotion, right? Because you're already creating the emotion of going, what? No way. You create the surprise, which triggers a release of dopamine. We're more likely to remember it. It sticks in our mind. It makes our brain more neuroplastic. So all of that I get. From the actual then helping them to calm down and to be able to get into that state, is there an example of a particular technique or approach that you found helpful?
Sure. One of our community favorite exercises is fear to action exercise. And we teach it at our Easy Reinvention Labs. It's a free open events we keep holding for the global needs, especially in the developing world where I am coming from, to make sure there's free education everywhere available. And it's a very simple exercise, but it starts from research that roots in the idea that you need to name the emotion to tame it. That half of the problem is just not allowing yourself to feel the emotion. And we also do that in business a lot. We come with a presentation on the new strategy. Scientifically speaking, we should be quite aware that it will only create a negative emotion. That majority of people, when they hear the word reinvention or optimization or transformation or anything like that, will hear my job will be cut. That's pretty much it. So you know you're creating a negative emotion, but you are pretending it's not there. And that bubble of suppressed emotion is becoming a huge cost to both acceleration of your strategy, implementation, and the productivity in the end. So what we discovered is that if we just name every emotion and every risk, it becomes a much more manageable. So the exercise goes as follows. Regardless to whatever you're facing right now, list every fear you have. In a business setting, sometimes the word fear is not accepted, so you can replace it with the word risk or the word threat. But essentially, let's just put them all on a long board and face them and name them and chew on them and fully feel them. And we do few things to help people fully understand that fear by imagining what happens when it realizes and so on. We then sort all of those threats into three categories. What's within my control, what's within my influence, even if I don't have control, and what's without my control. It's outside my zone of control. Inevitably, few things happen every time. Number one, once people name all their fears, they immediately see groupings and realize they have much less fears than they think. They name them, but they come down to the same 2-3 fears. Unless you structure them, our brain is not linear. So if I'm saying a sentence, I am in Columbus, Ohio today, every part of that sentence is processed by different part of my brain simultaneously. So unless I write it down or I verbalize it, there is no way to process linear thought. And that soup of concepts, images, feelings, and words creates a sense that I have more threat than I actually do. Once you put it on a list, one thing, you realize you have much less fears than you think. And two, you have much more under control than you think. And from there, you can move into action and decide what you do with it. And that's just one example of an exercise you might do before a big brainstorm, or an exercise you would buffer between the data presentation and what we're going to do about this presentation. Is normalizing the biological nature of our being. As you absolutely brilliantly highlighted, no matter what you think, your emotions will override it. Our typical emotion is 500 times faster than our thought. And I can demonstrate to all of you that very quickly. We are all drivers. I guarantee 99.9% of listeners are drivers. Remember the last time you were in a passenger seat and the driver was doing something crazy. Your foot was pressing an imaginary brake. You intellectually recognized when you sit down in the passenger seat, there's no brake there. Your mind knows there is no brake there, but the emotion will always override. So you will automatically press an imaginary brake. And that happens in every boardroom, in every conference room. Somebody is pressing imaginary brake, even if you refuse to see it. And it's our job as reinvention practitioners, as people driving change, to design places where we allow emotions to be used as a resource, not crushed or ignored.
I love that example. What's interesting as well about the technique, to me, it's almost like there's a combination of two things that I often use. One is what I call the agency mindset, which is similar to the notion of what's under your control, what's under your influence, what's outside of your control. But the other piece is it's a brilliant explanation that you gave about something that oftentimes I find myself describing to people, which is neuroscientists figured out there's a concept called emotional granularity, which is that the more granular you are, the more specific you are about exactly what you're feeling. Not only does that help, to your point, that you understand it better, but it actually regulates the emotions. One of the challenges with making changes with reinvention, I used to always think about personal reinvention. I love that term, personal reinvention. I could just reinvent myself. My life was going terribly. I'm going to reinvent myself. I've got no friends. I'm going to reinvent myself. I'm overweight. It was always this like beautiful promised land. But with that comes a shift in your identity. One of the biggest obstacles, I think, sometimes to change or reinvention is the person's identity and our desire to try to keep it stable. How do you deal with the executives or the folks in the organization's identity when it comes to helping them to reinvent, knowing that that's going to be a struggle?
I have to step backwards towards data first to explain my choice. And the data is around the levels of disruption. So one piece of data, for example, is the Accenture Global Disruption Index, which is now, I think, Pulse of Change, it's called index. And a few years ago, they issued, I think it was 2022, right after COVID, they were measuring levels of disruption. So they usually look at the 5-year periods, and they were comparing 2017 to 2022 versus the previous 5 years, which is 2011 to 2016, post-economic crisis year. So 5 years versus 5 years. In the 5 years, 2011 to 16, the levels of disruption grew 4%. That means your typical week is 4% more likely to have cancellations of your flights, your customer calling in and canceling an order, your employee not showing up at work, something horrible or exciting happening in your family, I know, unexpected but very happy pregnancy, for example, still a disruption. All of those things, 4%. The following 5 years, the growth was not 8% or 20% or 50%, it was 200%. And it staying at that levels. So your week is now 200% more disrupted by cancellations or opportunities or new technologies or new competitors or new boss requests and new clients requests and so on, your family needs and so on. So in that context, when your external environment is so volatile, it becomes incredibly dangerous to build your identity on external markers because those markers go very, very quickly. When I look at my friends from the former Soviet Union who are having a hard time still to this day, and Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, are the ones who build their identity on being a Soviet. Because there's no way back into that identity. You will always live in a half-mourning state because part of you is constantly homeless and dead. And that applies now to all of us in the corporate world. It used to be that a company would be unshakable. We're seeing changes in a company's life where a company that would be unshakable for 100 years could disappear overnight. And if a profession, coal miner, my grandfather was a coal miner, my father was a coal miner, I'm a proud coal miner. If my profession disappears, who am I? If we build identity on external factors in a highly volatile and disrupted environment, we are creating a condition in which we will always feel broken because something in external condition will inevitably get destroyed and faster than ever before, 200% plus faster than before. Things that were unshakable and unbreakable are shaking and breaking. And therefore, the greater is disintegration outside, the greater our work needs to be on integration on the inside. Building an unshakable core that has nothing to do with external factors. I am not a sum total of my diplomas or my client base or my CV or my achievements, of my assets or my possessions, because all of them can disappear. I have to learn to find things that can never be taken away. And those are inner resources. I'm a source of optimism, or I'm a source of renewal, or whatever variations work for them. Some people love more tangible variations, so they look at, for example, their family lineage, and they're part of this long thousands of army of ancestors. And I understand that, coming from a nomadic environment where we are very deeply connected to our ancestors. For some, that kind of source of that identity, where I come from, what my parents, grandparents, ancestors had to survive, can never be taken away from me. So if I'm entering into a meeting, I'm entering with that army. That is unshakable identity. Some people prefer categories or trends or states or markers, more in the category of I'm about hope, or I'm about progress, or I'm about big picture, or vice versa. I'm very good at intimate, detail-oriented, those markers that, again, can never be taken away from us. But separating ourselves from the external markers of identity is becoming very, very important. Otherwise, we will always feel personally attacked by the change. We would take change personally because a little piece of me is being killed right now. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I try to do with a lot of the folks I work with is based upon the identity. And sometimes obviously people are going to deal with things like imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, certain challenges and beliefs about themselves, what they can do, what they can't do. And again, a lot of times their learnings come from outside of them. Mm-hmm. And what I try to help people to do is develop what I call an anti-fragile identity. And this is really, the story that you tell, because really our identities are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And so the anti-fragile identity is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves as being someone who, whenever something happens that's challenging or change or anything negative, anything at all, it all serves to help us to become stronger, better, smarter, more resilient, more capable, more able. And that way, sort of, it becomes, to your point, something that we craft on purpose.
Yeah.
That we reinvent, I suppose, our own identity in that as well. And that then allows us to be able to embrace change or reinvention more easily because, again, there's nothing to fear there. It's all serving to help us to become better in that way. One of the concepts that you mentioned that I love, and I know it's probably something that you talk about all the time, or you used to talk about it a lot, but it's the Titanic Syndrome. Could you share with the listeners, because I just love this concept.
So when I just started out, my doctorate started in 2001. I was studying companies that were collapsing seemingly all of a sudden. And the first one in my list was Enron, and after that, Kodak and Nokia and many others. Blockbuster and on Lehman Brothers and so on. I had a lot of research opportunities at the beginning of the century, and I kept looking at the companies that did collapse versus the companies that made it, and there's a very consistent set of things that the collapsed companies all shared. And often we think it's about technical or technological breakdown, that Kodak died because of digital photography and Nokia collapsed because of the smartphones. But when you look at the actual data, it completely is not supported by facts. Kodak invented digital photography. Nokia had a great portfolio of smartphones at the time of their nosedive towards near bankruptcy. All of that is not about technology. Most of us have access to technology, so it's something else. And I kept looking at all these markers, and I was an executive education professor in a business school in Slovenia, and I had another professor in another classroom who I admire very much, Juan Serrano, comparing the story of Titanic to a case in business. And I was like, That's what it is. It's Titanic Syndrome. So there's eerie similarities between what happened on Titanic and what I see in companies that went from Titans to Titanic overnight. And that number one is this idea that we are too big to fail, we're too good to fail, we're too unbreakable to fail, we're too unshakable to fail. So if you see that in a culture and you see that in a language that is displayed in boardrooms, it's just clearly a marker that you're in a risk zone. That kind of complacency and inertia is the first marker. The second marker is even more scary, is this idea that what worked yesterday will actually work tomorrow. And that is demonstrated by a tragic, tragic story of a person who was at the wheel of Titanic at the moment of the crash. It was already night, so the captain was already asleep. Captain is its own tragic story. It was his last voyage before retirement given to him as a reward. So it's a tragic story, and he was already asleep. And at the helm was a 39-year-old First Officer Murdoch, a wonderful man by every recollection. He's been in the news before more than once, and he was very known at that time, celebrity status, for one thing: preventing crashes. Well, there was a moment in his history when he literally stopped the crash few inches, two boats 2 inches away, few inches away from each other. And he did that by knowing exactly what to do. And during the Titanic crash, he did exactly what worked in the past. There was no time to think. He was giving orders automatically using the best practice that saved boats in the past. The problem is this was a new technology. We remember the containers that separated the water tightness inside the Titanic. That was the first time used technology. And many scientists say if he did nothing, if he just allowed the boat to hit head on, it would be damaged, but it would never sink. So you need to abandon your own best practices, or at least question them. And once you sit in there and assume that you know it because it worked in the past, that's a dangerous side of Titanic Syndrome, because the shelf life of solutions today is very, very short. So Titanic Syndrome is a corporate or personal disease. I get infected on a regular basis. When you live in the sense of arrogance, attachment to status quo, and inability to see the incoming iceberg in your own life, in your team life, in your company life, your country life.
I just love that. I'm a huge fan of this notion of the Titanic Syndrome. Just a couple more questions on this and we'll go to the quick fire round. When it comes to reinvention overall, a lot of times I've heard you describe it more like these are muscles that you use, right? So it's the metaphor of the muscles. Could you talk about why that is? Like, a lot of people think of reinvention as something that, oh, I reinvent something. So it's almost like a project. So I come up with the idea and I go, okay, we've reinvented our marketing strategy. Great. Thanks very much, Nadia. We're good. Mm-hmm. But actually, it doesn't work like this. And I think probably part of it is, there is no such thing as change stopping. We're going to constantly have to reinvent on a regular basis. But could you talk to the reason you chose the metaphor and what you mean exactly by using reinvention and seeing reinvention as something that is like a muscle that we've got to keep on building and working on?
Absolutely. So in the 20th century, the typical business model of a company could produce the same cash flow for an average of 60 to 75 years. That means I could build a system and then milk the system without the need to reinvent for 30, 40, 50 years. In this century right now, our research is as late as 2024, so just half a year research suggests that 20% of companies today are reinventing every 12 months or less. The speed of change means you can no longer treat reinvention as a project. Once you reinvent every 30 years, of course you treat it as a project. Even every 5 years, why would you treat it as a continuous process? You do the big jump and you're done. That's why most of reinvention efforts were outsourced for the last 200 years to companies like McKinsey, because you don't need to have this inside-out capacity, your company capacity to reinvent, if you're only going to use this skill once every 20, 30, whatever years. Right now, Treating change as a project is impossible because you will be constantly suffocating in a new and new wave of projects. You need to move from the idea of treating change like a project into treating change like a process. It's more like taking a shower on a regular basis or brushing your teeth every day, hopefully twice a day, and floss, and whatever guys you do, take care of your teeth, hopefully on a regular basis. You don't brush them every minute. You don't brush them after every meeting, but you do brush them twice a day regularly. And you don't invent new methods of brushing every time. Everyone knows this is the toothpaste, this is the toothbrush, this is the movements you do, and you have an effective brushing technique. Companies, however, today are treating change as if it's still a project. So they don't brush for 7 years, and they try to brush very, very well for 2 weeks or for 2 months. By that time, all the teeth already fell out. There's no point of trying to save anything. It's pure firefighting. It's way too late. So if you compare it to that, to washing your body, if I don't take a shower on a regular basis, I begin to stink. Same with your products, your brands, your business processes, your market strategies. They begin to stink, and occasionally gangrene will develop. So we have to create a regular process that includes regular cadence. And the cadence for different things is different, just like in our body. So in my body, some systems require very quick pace. Breathe in, breathe out. That's usually every few seconds. I breathe in every few seconds, I breathe out every few seconds. Very quick reinvention cycle. In, out. Digestion system, if I was, eating and, forgive my language, pooping every few seconds, I would not be functional. So there are some systems you don't reinvent that often. When you talk about business processes, for example, cadence is very quick. If you don't constantly think of a better way to do things you will be out of business. Business modeling, much more complex. Probably you don't reinvent it every few months. You reinvent it every few months, half a year, every 2 years. So different parts of your company need a different cadence, but all of them need a continuous process.
And so with that, the other question I have on that is, so kind of paradoxical to an extent in the sense of you're helping people to be able to generate like changes that they have, the changes that they make. They're constantly working on reinvention and change, and they're doing it so on a sort of a stable, regular basis. Could you give us an example of, and I know it's hard because again, it's going to be different if you have a shower, different if you brush your teeth, but could you give us an example from a business perspective of an exercise that could be done on a regular basis that could help us to help any leaders out there to actually start the process of getting to the habit of reinventing?
We have tons of them, but I'll give you the easiest one. Most of the time with reinvention, we assume it's adding things to our plate, and we're already overwhelmed. Every research point shows we're at burnout, we're at the maximum, employees are disengaged. So before you add anything to your plate, remove. So the regular exercise I do every Friday, that will be tomorrow morning, I have a no session. I look at everything on my agenda, everything on my plate, short-term and long-term. My calendar right now is already booking next October. So everything on my plate, and I decide what I'm going to kill. At the company level, one of my students and wonderful friend, Chief People and Systems Officer at a telecom company, Tahmina Kodri, she created a kill session in her company where every few months, all of the employees come together in a particular area and come together and kill projects that clearly are not showing enough promise. And there is a debate and there's a battle. It's all made into a party. They named it very funny in their local language. So it's not perceived as a horrible thing. It's perceived as a celebration. People defend their projects. People attack projects. It's like a rap battle almost. But having that regular cadence where we remove things gives us space to say yes to things that actually matter. So I would introduce at a personal level, 10-minute no session or kill session every week in your calendar where you remove things. And at company level, at the team level, do it at least every 3 months.
And so just to reiterate, that's to kill what you're going to do, not to kill an actual human being.
Absolutely.
So everyone's going to be walking about and go, she said to kill if we want to reinvent. So
Absolutely no human should be harmed.
no humans.
Production for reinvention. No animal, hopefully, either. Absolutely. Kill a process, kill a project, we always done it this way. Kill something that is clearly not working anymore.
That's a great, I love that exercise or suggestion. You went to Ireland recently, my beautiful home country, and you did the Reinvention Summit. We were talking just before this, just briefly about Ireland and why you felt it was an apt place for the Reinvention Summit. Can you share your perspective on that, just so I can bask in hearing someone talk nice things about my favorite country in the world?
Of course. Well, by grace of God, 4 crazy people, 3 Irishmen and 1 Kazakh, came together to co-found the Reinvention Summit. And together with Aidan McCullen and Michael John Hearn and 9 Yards team, we created this opportunity to rethink what a conference might be. So it's not exactly pure conference, it's not exactly entertainment or circus du Soleil, but it's an experience. It's a well-crafted transformation experience. I went there because I truly believe Ireland, like Kazakhstan, like few other places I love so much, are the land. Ireland is the land of reinvention. Looking at the glory of what the country went through in just the last 150 to 100 years, from near loss of the entire nation due to famine, and just like Kazakhstan, I believe at least partially architectured famine, to the place where in the middle of the greatest crisis, the greatest business opportunity came about, and now it's a headquarters for some of the biggest names in the world by rethinking the place and the role that country can offer to the world. And now thinking of the next wave of reinvention, one of the things we held was the panel on reinventing Ireland and connecting different players to think about what's next for Ireland, what's the next strategic jump curve, next S-curve. That was just beautiful because this is a country that shows again and again that you can reinvent without losing your roots, that you can weave the history, you can weave the identity. You don't need to become anything else than you are, but at the same time, you can bring completely new, fresh way forward of expressing who you are. And that's the beauty, is without losing your heart, without losing your soul, finding new and new ways of expressing that soul. That's the essence of reinvention for me, and that's why I chose Ireland for myself.
Fantastic. Love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Nadia. Quick fire round. Your favorite movie or a favorite movie you have?
They change all the time. Right now, I highly recommend Adjustment Bureau to everyone. And The Arrival, which people think is a movie about aliens, has nothing to do with aliens. It's a movie about the power of language. So if you want to understand the power of language and how you should be careful with language, The Arrival.
Arrival and Adjustment Bureau. Beautiful. A favorite author?
Again, it changes so much, but I always come back to 2 of my youth favorites, which is Eric Maria Remarque and Bach, especially Jonathan Livingston, the Seagull.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Favorite artist?
Wow. Visually appealing versus intellectually stimulating would be different. Frida Kahlo is intellectually stimulating, even though I don't generally enjoy the disruptive nature of her images. I have a lot of Kazakh artists I love and have around my house, and some of the classics, of course, like Monet.
Fantastic. A favorite philosopher?
Ooh. There is a question mark for me around philosophy, but I would occasionally dip in different areas. Nietzsche sometimes, then you go classics like Socrates, and sometimes to some of the more of the recent work. But depends on the day. I do want to say one word about a budding philosopher that introduced me to the idea of warm data. And that is, for me, has been a beautiful idea that so much of what we do is cold data. But there is something that happens with worm data. This is the data that happens in a human being environment between humans that you can hardly catch. And that's Nora Bateson, who is a daughter of a remarkable philosopher Bateson.
Great, Gregory Bateson. Fantastic stuff. Just a few more, if that's okay. So favorite TV series, anything?
This very second, still to this day, Sense8.
Yeah, but great. Favorite musician or band?
Well, that changes every single day. That is very hard. If you listen to what I listen, I go from rap. I still am a big fan of Eminem. My daughter is a big fan of Eminem and Macklemore because of me. But then I can go into classics, Rachmaninoff, for example.
Fantastic. Favorite, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Yeah, there's a lot around feelings and emotions and sensitivity to be able to sense more nuanced sensing of the feelings of the others.
Right, so like masterful empathy.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could go anywhere, past, present, or future, when would you go?
I would definitely go to the past. There are moments in history that I just wanted to watch what happened. For example, we are going to host a massive Reinvention event in South Africa next year. And this is a country that was able to go through apartheid and come out into reconciliation, not into war. I want to know what happened. I want to know, I want to be the fly on the wall to know which were the triggers and levers and serendipities that allow the country not to go into a civil war, which is absolute majority of countries would do that, but go into truth and reconciliation.
Love it. If you could do anything besides what you're doing, any other profession, or if you could live anywhere besides where you're living, where would you live and what would you do?
On doing, I danced professionally for 9 years. Occasionally I still miss it. On living, I am currently trying to organize my life to be at least in 3 locations on a regular basis, which is Kazakhstan, Europe, and US. So adding anything else to this mix. With my daughter now moving to New York, I think this is way too much of a task. So I'll stay with my 3 locations.
Sounds great. And then finally, one piece of advice for all the world on a billboard. You got a sentence. What is the main thing that you would like to say to people that they should try to inspire the world?
Follow the moments you feel most alive. That's the only criteria. The meeting when you felt most alive, the phone call you felt most alive, the food made you most alive. Follow that as the only capital that makes sense right now. Because you might have financial capital, products, people, and have a dead company or a dead country. Or you can have every kind of challenge, but so alive that it will figure it out. So just follow this moment of aliveness and study it relentlessly so that you can increase it in your own life and for others.
I love that. And look, that's real philosophy as well, by the way. So you're definitely going in that direction. Where can people find out more about you and what should people do if they say, oh my goodness, this is, which they will, oh my goodness, this was amazing. How can I learn more about Dr. Nadia and what can I do to go down this reinvention journey?
It's very easy. You go to Google and research Reinvention Academy or just our website, www.learntoreinvent.com. You will find a few resources just to start you off. And one of them is our handbook, the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook. Just download the PDF, do the first exercises, see what it gives you. Start small. Don't worry about eating the elephant at one sitting. Just do one exercise from the first chapter of the book. That's enough. And it's a free download. It's available for the whole world. We'll be happy to have you.
Fantastic. So go to learntoreinvent.com or just search Reinvention Academy. You've got the free Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, which I've read, and it's fantastic. It's incredible that you get that resource for free. So I highly recommend everyone to go there. It's brilliant, and you'll get so much more from this. Dr. Nadia, thank you so much for taking this time. Really appreciate it. You've been absolutely wonderful, and it's been a real privilege to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I hope we see each other in person soon.
Me too. Thanks, everyone. Take care, be well, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye for now.